Remind me, but
You ready?
Yeah.
Go. The lighting alright?
Yeah, I think that works.
Yeah, it works. Okay, go on, ready.
okay. So ask away.
How important do you think media is in modern society?
I think the media, and effectively run media, certainly is really central to the correct functioning of modern democracy. I don't think people can make political decisions and decide about matters of great importance to their everyday lives unless they're clear about what the circumstances of the day are. And the media is the means by which people find those things out, whether radio, media, televisual, or these days, I guess, through the internet. They're hugely important.
What is media censorship?
It's a restriction on what the media can talk about. I think that's a pretty straightforward definition. If I were asked to give one, that's probably what I'd pick. Some things can't be news, I guess.
Can you name any of the bodies that impose media censorship?
Well, I guess the various media organisations censor their own material in that some of the stuff they produce doesn't pass the scripting stage, some of the stuff that's filmed or recorded doesn't get broadcast. You do also have the British Board of Film Censorship, which has an eye for what's acceptable in movies. And there is also a Press Complaints Commission, which surveils, not particularly effectively, in my view, the way in which newspapers deal with information and stories that they're running with.
Do you think there's too much censorship in modern society?
I think that's quite a difficult question to answer, and the reason I say that is because there are bodies which censor and control information that's available through state organisations and large corporate organisations, but the advent of the internet as a giant gossip forum means that in fact censorship is really difficult to apply these days. If the newspapers weren't printed, you can usually find it out online. So in a way, I'm not sure I can really answer that question. You might argue that there isn't effective censorship of anything at the moment, because the internet makes it possible to discover anything that people wish to have kept secret in any case.
Do you think that, can you name any occasions, whether they be recent or moments from history, when censorship of the media has been harmful?
Yes, very many. The 20th century is packed full of totalitarian regimes which have sought to keep the truth from their populace, or have told people things that simply weren't correct, with a view to controlling what people thought and said. I'm thinking probably in that connection of Stalinist Russia, of Hitlerian Germany, and in the modern period, states like North Korea still have fairly total media control. I mean, there are, of course, also conspiracy theorists, and I have perhaps some sympathy with their views, who say that modern states like Britain run under a kind of censorship. People know a great many things about the activities of those in power, which don't reflect very favourably on those who are in charge, and yet they choose to keep them silent. There's a conspiracy of silence, some people would say, in modern Britain, which keeps from the light things about the way in which our country works that really people should know an awful lot about. Just think about how self-regulation of parliamentary expenses failed and was horribly exposed by the Daily Telegraph 2 years ago. That's a case in point, isn't it, of people controlling information about public activities which were in fact deeply reprehensible and which, when they did come to light, were treated censoriously, never mind with censorship.
And so you think that in a way censorship can lead to a sort of totalitarian state?
I think that's a very, very real danger. It's one of the things that the present political class are discussing in relation to the Leveson inquiry and the report that was produced. We need a fearless and questioning press that speaks truth to those in power and holds people who are politically responsible to account for their choices and their actions. If we have too many restrictions on press freedom, then the nature of our democracy is grossly imperilled. On the other hand, the freedoms that the British press, some of them have, anyway, some sectors of the British press in particular choose to use, seem to be mainly focused on discovering the prurient details of people's social and sexual lives, and I don't think those are appropriate topics for public debate. They're just not anyone's business.
So you think there was censorship imposed, then it'd probably stop the personal attacks on people through the media?
Well, I'm not sure that it would, because I don't think complete censorship is easy to impose. The net circumvents it. On the other hand, I think the idea of self-regulation of the press, which is basically a gentleman's club, people keeping an eye on each other, has failed. The press in this country, I think, in some ways is too powerful. It's not accountable, some sections of it at any rate. Quite a lot of our press is owned by one person. He claims, Mr. Murdoch, not to make any editorial decisions about the kind of information that's broadcast. I don't believe him, and I don't think many people do. That's censorship, if you like, of a kind, because it amounts to non-state control of media output. May be enough, actually, to steer a sense of what the current topics of debate are in the whole of British society. Mr. Murdoch doesn't choose all of the news items that come out, but his newspapers and his TV stations set the broadcast agenda, which means things he doesn't approve of or isn't interested in won't make it to the light.
Do you think that there's been an occasion, do you think there's been moments from history or recent when actually a lack of censorship has been harmful? Like maybe the shootings recently, or Columbine, or...
That's a hard question for me to answer, because my news is time-stamped. I always get it some while after the event. I don't watch the rolling news programmes, and I don't receive Twitter feeds. So when I find out about things that have happened, it's usually some while after they've occurred, and usually news information isn't enormously time-sensitive. I can think of some circumstances where knowing all the facts of a case would be, for instance, prejudicial to a police inquiry, or prevent other kinds of investigations from being able to go ahead. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Not everything needs to be known, and good journalism, good newspapers and media broadcasters have fine judgment about the facts that need to be brought to public attention. The rest is prurient and shouldn't be broadcast, not because there should be an absolute prohibition on people knowing these things, but because we're not, as a culture, we probably shouldn't be interested in the intimate details of celebrities' sex lives and the like. It's just not news. It shouldn't be broadcast. It's a waste of time, in my view.
So do you think the media can actually, like, films or an entertainment media sort of, could actually persuade, is powerful enough to persuade someone to actually go out and kill?
The idea that media stroke fictional productions can make people do things that they are not otherwise inclined to do, I simply don't buy. I think that's a political shibboleth that the more stupid members of the right-wing political class, of whom there are a great many in my view, hold. I don't find it plausible that anyone does anything which they're not inclined to do anyway. Being presented with information, or indeed with representations, doesn't, I think, push anyone into acting in a way that's contrary to their nature. The fact that we produce vulnerable or easily influenced young people is a societal problem. The idea that some people maybe take to heart films and television programs rather more than they ought is not the responsibility of the program makers. It's the responsibility of the society that produces people, some of whom can't think critically and for themselves. And you might think that a good media education, whether provided by English or media studies or whichever academic subject, allows people that sense of independence because it teaches them to think independently about what they're told and the representations which they are presented with.
Do you think media censorship can either harm an artist's creativity or an audience's entertainment?
I think that question is...
Shall I roll them into separate questions?
You could do. I mean, I think that question is a really complicated one. I think that certain kinds of censorship clearly do harm artistic creativity and artistic endeavour. On the other hand, it's probably also true that great artists are compelled to respond, firstly. They will create art regardless of their personal or societal circumstances. Secondly, I think it is true that very often grave constraints on the artistic form which someone's work can take actually encourages people to challenge those artistic constraints and overcome them. No one's going to say of Beethoven's sonatas, for example, that he was constrained by the artistic form that he chose to use for his music. His very activity artistically pushed back the boundaries of what was possible with the sonata form and with the piano as an instrument, and what was possible for performers playing his music. Art isn't freedom. Art is incredible, gross, numbing constraint out of which great creativity arises. The two aren't really oppositions. There's a false dichotomy there, I think. As far as societal benefit from censorship is concerned, that was your second question, wasn't it?
Yeah, do you think because you see a lot of programmes that
Yeah.
have famous bits of film like Right and Rock, had
Yeah.
the ending changed,
Yeah.
censorship. Do you think it can significantly harm the finished product for an audience?
Well, I think they make it different, and sometimes that finished product can be less effective, so therefore it is harmed. On other occasions, I'm not sure. You might claim that some versions of particularly films, which seem to be the focus of censorship rather more than any other art media, can be improved by the fact that they've had to be cut. And I think that's a tricky one. I was thinking in this connection with of a film called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which was first released with many cuts because its subject matter is pretty shocking, and it was treated fairly bluntly. And then subsequent releases incorporated more material, and now, because it's regarded as a cult classic, I suppose, it's possible to obtain it on DVD or from Netflix or what have you, completely uncut. I think my overall sense is that the great British public, and indeed the public more generally, is sensible enough to make its own judgments about the art materials which it has put in front of it. And if there are ever any reasons for not allowing something to be represented or shown or for it to come to light, those reasons can only and only ever should be temporary in any case.
I've got just two more questions. One was, could you name sort of a specific case where censorship has improved, has stretched the boundaries of art? Or if you think one of how it restricts it as well?
Right, so either extension or restriction. Okay, my case where censorship has extended the boundaries of art would be, for instance, a novel like Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy, which was published with lots of asterisks in it, where there are sex scenes, because at the time of publication towards the end of the 18th century, it wasn't possible to write frankly about people having sex with each other. However, because Stern is an extremely clever and very self-aware writer, the presence of whole episodes where pages are asterisked or blanked out in fact becomes the subject of novelistic commentary. Stern jokes, for example, that in some chapters of his book he's hung lots of stars to lead the reader onwards on their way through his text. So censorship in that case made the writer think very self-consciously about the nature of the medium in which they were working, and the influence of Stern's self-awareness on subsequent novelists has been really profound. Censorship helped the boundary of the novel form to be changed and developed in the instance that I've cited. As far as censorship degrading artwork, The example I'd give there would be of the 1936 exhibition of Entartete Kunst in Berlin, in which the Nazis collected all of the modern artists whose work they disapproved of and showed them to a vast public that they confidently expected to be angry about the artwork and to despise it. In fact, of course, after 3 or 4 years of the Nazi regime, the Berliners, being a fairly rebellious lot, were absolutely delighted to have an exhibition of degenerate art put on in their city, and it was an absolute sellout, but for the wrong reasons. In fact, one of the things it did was popularise to a non-German public the idea that there were some exceptionally interesting visual artists that work in Central Europe in the 20s and 30s. Anyone whose picture was in the Nazi degenerate art exhibition is now almost certain to have a space in a modern art gallery, either in Germany or in Britain or in New York or somewhere like that. Censorship just raised the value, the critical value and the financial value of the artworks that the Nazis attempted to coral and control. It had the opposite effect to the one they intended.
Can I ask one more question? Can you name an example of someone dying for their art due to media censorship? Like maybe like Victor Jara.
I think there are people who've killed themselves in protest at repressive regimes. I'm not quite sure that's the same as dying for your art. I don't know enough about art to know particular specifics, I suppose. There are plenty of people who've taken physical risks to make artwork, and indeed being an artist in lots of ways is probably quite unhealthy as a lifestyle. There are people who've died in protests against state repression. Even as recently as this year, people have died in places like Egypt because they've been on the streets protesting about their right, in their eyes, to free speech. Plenty of people have died from being clubbed by state forces, that's for sure.
Final question is sort of a general sort of question. I think I've probably answered this already, but do you agree with media censorship?
I don't think that I do. I think, of course, that there are some circumstances where you would not want all the facts of a case to be broadcast, or where you might think that people had an entitlement to privacy and a life away from the public eye. I think the position I'd take is that maybe some censorship can be justified pro tem, but that in the long run, all facts must come to light. And whether we choose to focus on them or not should be a matter for politeness and the nature of our societally developed interest, rather than the decisions of those supposedly wiser and older than us. Because I don't think that our political class, who might impose censorship, frankly, have any right to moral authority over the rest of us. If they did have in the past, they've certainly lost it now, I think.
Thank you for your old time.